506. And I don't know that I play this very well. But we'll get through it. I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be His than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or lands. I'd rather be led by His nail-pierced hand than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's great sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. I'd rather have Jesus than men's applause. I'd rather be faithful to His dear cause. I'd rather have Jesus than worldwide fame. I'd rather be true to His holy name than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's great sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. He's fairer than lilies of dearest bloom. He's sweeter than honey from out of the comb. He's all that my hungering spirit needs. I'd rather have Jesus and let Him lead than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's great sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world affords today. I should have practiced that one a little more before I tried to play it, but the words of the song were what I was aiming at. Well, what are we 8 minutes already? I didn't even start.
I dropped the Bible on the floor.
Are you okay? Are you doing okay? You good?
Great.
Great. Good.
I got Cindy behind me, Cindy beside me. I can't lose.
I'm going to have to start calling her Cynthia just to keep y'all straight. Is that your middle name?
That's what I've been called.
Yeah, Cindy Lou.
Cindy Lou.
That's not Denise.
What is your middle name? Denise. Cynthia Denise.
That reminds me of an old Cajun joke I heard one time. Let's see, how did it go?
What book are we in?
I'm going to be in the Bible, personally. Use whatever you like. I'll be in the Bible. And you guys can be turning to Genesis 29, but when she said her middle name was Denise, it just reminded me of that old Cajun that time. He was trying to help his sister name her baby. And she said, well, do you have any ideas for my baby's name? And, I can't do the Cajun accent, but he said, well, is it a boy or a girl? And she said, well, you're right, you need to know that to help me name it. Well, it's a girl. He said, Denise. She said, well, I hadn't thought of that name. It sounds pretty good. What would you have named it if it had been a boy? He said, the nephew. The nephew, Denise, never mind. Some of y'all get that on the way home. I can't believe you haven't heard that.
That's an old. I think I don't know that
It was funnier when I heard it because the guy had a Cajun accent. And, you know, Denise, the nephew. All right. Now you see why I'm not a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
Not my strong suit.
Oh, sorry.
I thought I had heard every joke there was about being short. And leave it to Mike to come up with another one. Am I standing up?
Standing for Jesus.
Wow.
Amen.
Now, just so you know, I've got Allison Bastian making me a shirt, and it says on the front, "Be careful, or you'll end up in my sermon." So, just so you know. I saw that in Louisiana, and I've got to have it. So she's making me one. All right. In all seriousness, we finished chapter 28, and just to kind of read into where we're going. Jacob has left home. Now, I've told you before that he was at least 60. And we know that because of the math we're given. There's a whole lot of numbers that are not given to us. So we don't know exactly how old he was. There are some people, and I'm quoting Henry Morris at this moment, there are some people who think he may have been as old as 75 when he left home. Now, that's kind of hard to believe. He could be between 60 and 75. What's that?
That's not old.
No, it's not. But keep in mind, he has no wife and no kids. So it is a little old to be starting a family.
They live longer.
I know, they live longer.
They lived longer. So, you know, maybe he just wanted to enjoy being a bachelor as long as he could. I don't know. But
They
anyway.
said he had a happy life. That's ugly.
Rick, happy like this, isn't
We're never going to get to this. We don't cut it out.
Yes, we are.
You know, let's assume, okay, let's follow your reasoning and logic. Let's say he did have a happy life. He's fixing to get married. So what are you saying about that?
And that's more happiness.
Okay, all right.
Oh, honey, you want to ride home, don't you? Oh, I knew it.
We don't know how long he spent in Bethel, but I can imagine, and just to remind you, in the last chapter, we have the experience with Jacob's ladder, which I told you last week is a picture of Jesus, and I showed you some scripture for that. And if you don't remember, you'll just have to watch it online. I'm not going to go back over that. But there was a really good parallel in John 1 with Nathaniel. A lot of people don't even know it's there. Anyhow, I didn't. I found that and I thought it was awesome. I didn't even know that was there. But anyway, he has an experience where he meets with God in a dream. And so I don't know how long he stayed at Bethel, but there's nothing in Scripture that says he ran off the next day. It's very possible if he had an experience with the Lord, he may not have been in a hurry to get to Haran. It's pretty quiet about the trip. He travels over 500 miles. We don't know how long it took. He's between the ages of 60 and 75, and we'll come back to his age and why that matters later. But in the meantime, all I want you to understand is he leaves Bethel after an undetermined amount of time, and he vows a vow and says that he's going to follow God who has kept him in this way that he goes and has given him bread to eat and clothes to put on. He says, I'm going to follow the God that's taking care of me. And he makes a point to say in verse 21 of chapter 28, so that I come again to my Father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. Now, I don't think that was a bargain. I think he's just explaining his reasoning there, or Moses is, who wrote this. So verse 22, he says, this stone which I have set before for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give thee 10th unto thee. So we have an example of tithing here. We see a place that's been set up, and it had been there before. Abraham had set one up too. But we have a specific pillar set up to honor the meeting of God there, and he calls this God's house. So, and just to remind you, years and years and years and years later, Bethel and Dan are both places where there were supposed to be holy places that get desecrated by a golden calf. So up until that time, that was recognized as a holy place. So we come to chapter 29, verse 1. The Bible says, then Jacob went on his journey, and came into the land of the people of the east. Now, I've looked at this on the map. I won't bore you with the details, but just understand that's a pretty tough trip to get up to what they called Syria, and then, you know, to kind of go in a northeasterly direction and then travel east so that you could run along the Euphrates River and have plenty to drink. You know, if you're going to travel that far, you want to keep your canteen full, and y'all understand that. So, he says in verse 2, he looked and beheld a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and the great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in its place. What they're explaining here is that this well wasn't constant flowing. It was some kind of stored water with a lid. And I can't describe it to you because I don't understand it myself. I just know that this well was different than a lot of the wells they had. This one had a stone on it, probably pretty heavy. Now, in that day, it wasn't uncommon for young boys, remember David, and even sometimes young women to be in charge of the sheep. If a father only had daughters, it wasn't unusual to have women who would be put in charge of tending the flock. So if you've got a big heavy stone that's got to be moved, well, you'd have to get more than one person to move it. So probably the reason that they set this up the way they did, and you'll see what I'm talking about in a minute, was because it took more than one person to move this great. The Bible calls it a great stone in verse 2. So it's a pretty good sized stone. It not near as big as the one in front of Jesus' tomb, but still a big stone. Verse 3. I've read this already, but I'll read it again. Thither were all the flocks gathered. It means that's where they were. And they rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the sheep and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in its place. And Jacob said to them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. Remember that God's providential care over us will often take us to where He wants us to go. I mean, that's the way that works. He'll put us in the path He wants us to go. He's hunting for Haran. That's where He's headed. He had never been there before. While He's got family there, He'd never been there before. You ever got lost before?
Yeah, in Lockhart.
Men aren't supposed to ever admit being lost. You know, we just never think we are. I actually got lost last week. First time in a long time I was lost. I used to keep an atlas with me. When I drove a truck, we didn't have GPS on our cell phones back then. I had one of those big ring atlases, not the kind with the glue in them. I'm talking about these. They were like spiral notebook. With the laminated pages, had truck stops in it, had all this information in it. Well, anyway, I used to keep one of those things. Now we've become so reliant upon our cell phones that I have not had an atlas since, well, probably 2011. So I was coming back from Dublin Saturday when I picked up the kiddos, the extra 3 we've been carrying around. They're going home tonight, by the way. Praise God, they're going home. Anyway, I was headed back and there was some kind of fatality. I didn't get any information, but highways shut down. Anytime there's a fatality, they shut it down. I don't know who hit who, what happened, but the officer that, this reminded me and Cindy, there was a fire, no, it was a wreck, rather. We were on a fire call once. And I remember me and Cindy having used the fire trucks to redirect traffic. And of course they're going to stop me. Where does this road go? How do I get out? What do I do? Yeah. Well, we're more helpful than this guy was. This police officer standing outside of his car just pointing that way. I rolled my window down. I said, where does that way go? Just follow the cars. Okay, what if some of them are going somewhere else? So I tried that, and I followed a car until I was pretty sure he had me lost. Then I pulled up my GPS, and I still don't know how I did it. I told my wife when I got home, it's almost like I went to sleep and somebody drove for 30 minutes and then woke me up, put me back in the driver's seat. I don't understand how I did it. But if you're headed, let's see, east-southeast on 36 from Hamilton, Gatesville. I don't know if y'all know where this is. It's okay. But you're headed, that highway will take you to Houston, Sealy, whatever. It'll get you to the Houston area if you stay on it long enough. I wouldn't go that far. But just going to Temple. This was right after I crossed the lake coming into Temple, almost to Temple. And this guy directed me off to the right. If you're going east and you take a right, you are now going south, right? Somehow, when I found myself, I was on the north side of 36, and I never crossed it again that I know of. And then I was headed to Moody, and I'm like,
Oh, wow.
I don't know what I did. I wound up on 317 headed to Moody, and I was like, what in the
You did the
world?
loop around and was going back. You were
I
going
don't-
south?
I don't know what I did, but when I got right, I got on 317 and headed back to Temple, and then got back on the highway. Anyway, I said all that to say this. Sometimes we get lost, and we don't even know how we did it. I think it's pretty neat that Jacob, and by the way, I make that trip all the time. Somebody redirected me and I got lost. But God's hand was on Jacob, and he not only gets there, but he runs into some people that know his uncle. So you'll notice here in verse 4, he says, my brethren, whence be ye? It means, where are y'all from? And they said, we're from Haran. He said unto them, know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. And he said unto them, is he well? And I said, yeah, he's doing good. Behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. Now, they evidently knew she kept sheep, and that she came at a certain time every day. So they're saying, not only do we know him, we know his daughter. She's on her way. She'll be here any minute. She's running late because ladies typically are later than men or something. I don't know. I'm just kidding. Maybe she was further away from the well. I don't know. I can only speak for my wife. I don't know about other ladies. My wife's always late. So.
Amen.
I tell you about the time I missed an entire George Strait concert because my wife made me late.
Yes.
I
Anyway,
heard that one.
I'm not going to tell it again then. This is interesting. Look at verse 7. He said, lo, it is yet high day. Neither is it time that the cattle should... I missed something, didn't I? No?
Yeah.
Well, I couldn't figure out how you knew she was late.
Because she's not there yet and they are.
I guess she came.
She may not be late. I was joking. Don't read too much into that. It was just a joke. She's not there yet. They're there. I just assume they're waiting on her. I don't know that. He says, he said, Jacob, this is Jacob talking, lo, it is yet high day. Neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep and go feed them. Now, I read over that and read over that and read over that. I couldn't figure out what he's saying. So, I won't lie to you. I looked at some commentary on it because I wanted to know what was going on here. And this is so obvious now that I know what I'm looking for. This is so interesting. He's basically telling them to get lost. He knows Rachel's coming. He wants them to go. He wants them to get out of here. Feed your sheep and go away. Now, I think that's interesting.
Interesting to me, he's bossing them around.
Well,
That's what I got at.
he's looking for a wife. Isn't that what they sent him there for? And he hears right away that his uncle's daughter's coming. He's probably hoping this is going to be the one, and he wants to get to see her, meet her, know her, talk to her, without everybody staring at him maybe. I don't know. Maybe he was shy. I don't know. But he says, look, it's high day. It's not time that the cattle should be gathered together. Why y'all got them all gathered here? Water the sheep. Go feed them. Go do something else. You have to remember when you said about him ordering them around, he's between 60 and 75. These are kids.
Yes, yeah.
And they're probably lazing around with the sheep and cattle and not doing much of anything because nobody's watching them. In fact, she's probably not late. She's probably not there yet because she's working and they're lazing up there, hanging out like boys do, probably into some mischief. I don't know what they're doing, but it's interesting. There's a whole lot in that one little verse. Remember that if there's more than one man there, and it sounds like there's several, they could have moved the thing and watered their sheep and left. Maybe they didn't because they knew Rachel couldn't move it and had to wait on her. And I think what he's trying to say is, y'all go ahead, I'll help her. I think that's what's going on. Anyway, it's not a big deal. I just thought it was cool. Verse 8. They said, we cannot until all the flocks be gathered together until they roll the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. I think they worked it out that way because it was a lot of trouble to move it and they only wanted to move it once. And they probably got there early so they can get in line so they can get done and get going faster. If you got a whole lot of animals to water and you can only do it at one time, well, you want to go first so you can get going first, probably. So that's probably why there's a line gathered here. I don't know. I just thought this was interesting. It may not be to you. It may be boring to you, but I thought it was interesting. Because you don't see anything like this anywhere else in the Bible where they gather up like this to water their animals. Anyway, verse 9, and while he yet spoke with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. That doesn't mean that, well, the reason it's worded that way, she kept them, she was the shepherdess. She kept them continually. That was her job, and we know that because they were expecting her. They weren't expecting, she wasn't just filling in for the day. That was her job. Verse 10, it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. A couple things to note about that. I don't know who usually moved the thing. Jacob does it by himself. Remember, he's older and stronger and probably showing off just a little bit. I was Marianne age once. I remember what it's like when you see a pretty girl and want to make a big impression. Does anybody else remember them days? You don't remember ever trying to impress your... Okay. He's over shaking.
No.
Wow. Okay.
She came.
You never went through a peacock phase?
No.
Okay. I did.
Okay.
Seemed like I'd just do anything I could to show out when the girls were around. I don't know how to help Rick if he don't understand that reference.
I'm happy.
He's
I'm
helpless.
happy.
Amen.
But anyway, so he moves this thing, and apparently he does it by himself. He went near, rolled the stone from the well's mouth, watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. It's hard to imagine why he's crying. And this kiss is just, it's normal greeting. Well, maybe not normal greeting. I mean, if you know somebody, it is. I don't think she had any idea who he was, but he knew who she was. So he kisses her. It's not a passionate kiss. It's just a kiss of greeting that's usually passed between family. But what would have surprised her is the fact he starts crying. He lifts up his voice and wept. Remember, he's at the end of a very difficult journey. He knows that's what he's there for, and he's found basically where he was headed. He's found his kinfolk. And just remember this. He had to feel very alone. You ever felt by yourself? I mean, really alone, like nobody cared about you and you were all alone in the world? You ever had those moments where you feel like you're by yourself? He's been by himself for 500 miles. God has led him to where he was meant to be and introduced him to what's going to be his future wife. So he's probably overcome with emotion. You can understand that. I don't know that we would have reacted that way, but that's what he does. I wanted to read this note and I forgot, so let me do this and move on. I'm stealing this from Henry Morse. This is not mine, but it was good enough I wanted to share it with you. It says, in the next 3 chapters, that means 29, 30, and 31, is found the record of Jacob's 20 long years away from his mom and dad and his home. It will be recalled that he was probably close to 75, remember that's his opinion, when he left home, so that he would be almost 95 when he gets back. However, in terms of normal aging and lifespans today, these figures could be cut almost in half to correspond with today's equivalent situations in our life. Even so, he's still well along in years to be leaving home for the first time to be looking for a wife. Many writers on Genesis treat this period of Jacob's life as though it were a punishment for his treatment of his brother. Actually, however, they were for the most part, Rick, very happy, prosperous years.
Amen.
With no more troubles and problems than are normally encountered by believers seeking to follow the Lord. He did receive some rather shabby treatment at the hand of his uncle Laban. On the other hand, his uncle does give him a job, permits him to marry his daughters, and makes it possible for him to build up an extensive holding of his own. So I just wanted to share that before we go any further. That's the next 3 chapters. That's what we'll be looking at. So back to our story. He gives her a hug and a kiss and feeds her animals for her. And then verse 12, Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother. Before this, she don't know who's kissing on her. Some strange guy runs up crying and kissing her. Can you imagine her reaction? But he tells her who he is and that he was Rebekah's son. And now she gets excited. So she ran and told her father. No doubt that Rachel had heard all about Rebekah. Assuming she hadn't met her herself. I doubt it. not at the age that Jacob is. It's very, very unlikely she'd ever met her. But she had heard of her, and she probably, had heard all kinds of things about her. So she gets excited, and she runs home. Says she ran and told her father. And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him, embraced him and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. So he moved him in, accepted him as family. These are all things that we would expect to happen, so I won't linger there. I'm trying to get somewhere, so let me move on. Verse 15, Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me? For not tell me what shall thy wages be. This is pretty interesting. He says, just because we're family doesn't mean you should have to work for me for free. Now, that goes in contrast to what we later see about Laban. So, I don't know why he was... I think in this month, Jacob worked for his room and board, and he had shown that he's smart, the Lord's with him, and he had probably proven himself to his uncle. Put it this way, and those of you, everybody in this room has been around long enough to know, when you find somebody good, that'll do a good job, you want to hang on to that person, right? Whether you've had a business and hired somebody yourself, or if you just had somebody come mow for you, somebody come spray for you, somebody bale hay for you, you name it. You get somebody good that takes care of your place, won't steal from you, won't cheat you. I mean, when you get somebody sure enough good, well, you know you've got something worth holding on to, even if it's going to cost you a little bit. It's well worth the money if you're going to invest in somebody you can trust, that's going to do a good job, going to be there on time. Think about Laban looking at Jacob. He probably had tried these other men around town, and they're probably like these ones Jacob encountered, who are sitting down in the grass, messing around by the well, not doing anything. He'd probably figured out that it's really hard to find good help these days, right? So for whatever reason, he offers him money and says, look, we're family, but you shouldn't be working for me for free. He could have went the other way and said, you know what, you're living under my roof, you're eating my bread, you're going to work for me. He didn't do that. And I think it was because of the type of work Jacob did. Jacob showed himself to be honest, hardworking, trustworthy, and the Lord's with him. It reminds me of Joseph that we're going to see later on in this book as we get toward the end of Genesis. Everything Joseph did prospered in his hands. I think Jacob was probably the same way, and he's smart. We always led to believe that people want you to have a strong back and a weak mind. But I think Jacob's intelligence is one of the reasons Laban wants him. He doesn't have to babysit him. And again, remember his age. He's lived enough life and dealt with enough animals. He's probably 10 times better than the people Laban's used to having around. So anyway, for all these reasons, he says, I want to hire you. What shall your wages be? Well, I've always wished somebody would ask me that. Name your price. But anyway, what shall thy wages be? Now this is interesting. This is where Jacob and I differ. Verse 16, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the other was Rachel. I meant to look it up and I didn't, but I think it's cool that both of these women, last name in either AH or EL, which are a reference to God. Now, I know you're thinking, big deal. Most of the Hebrews wind up with names like that. They do, but not until Israel becomes a nation. Before Israel becomes a nation, this isn't as common as you might think. In fact, I don't even know if they're speaking Hebrew yet. Follow me for a minute. Where's Abraham from? Well, before that. Where'd he come from? Ur of the Chaldees. Babylon, basically. Y'all know what language they spoke back then? They spoke a Chaldean language, but it's the same as Aramaic, very similar to Aramaic. Basically, they spoke an older form of Aramaic. All the way back then, Aramaic's a very old language. So, probably Abraham raised up learning Aramaic. Then he moved to what they call Syria, Harar. I don't know if they encountered another language there or made up their own. But they moved from the Chaldean territory to Syria. Both Abraham and Isaac had dealings with the Philistines and the Egyptians. Did they just have really good interpreters, or were they very good with linguistics? Did they learn multiple languages growing up? And where does the Hebrew language come in? Think about that. They do wind up with their own language, the Hebrew language. Where does it come into all this? Notice that when Jacob gets to this well, he's speaking the same language they're speaking. Everybody speaks the same language. If I had to guess, I'd say they're speaking Aramaic before they're speaking Hebrew. I'd say they were all speaking Aramaic even then. So when you get to verse 16 and you find that Laban's daughters are named Leah and Rachel, that's interesting to me. That's evidence somebody's worshiping God. I know you got to be thinking, Chad, what does any of this matter? It interests me because they're naming their kids after a God that not all of them serve. Remember, Abraham's father sold idols. His name was Terah. There's your God again, AH. So there's a whole lot there that I don't know, but I do find it interesting. His daughters are named Leah and Rachel. Verse 17, Leah was tender-eyed. I have no idea what that means. I don't know who does. I've read some stuff on it, but nobody seems to agree. Anybody have a thought on tender-eyed? What does that mean? Leah was tender-eyed.
Delicate.
Delicate.
Delicate, okay.
Mine says lovely, has lovely eyes.
Lovely eyes.
You see what I'm saying? I can't find any two people that agree on what that means.
Mine says weak-eyed. Mine does too, Leah.
Does that mean she couldn't see good?
Maybe she had an eye issue.
Cross-eyed.
Cross-eyed.
Like when you get.
Maybe she had a lazy eye.
Yeah.
Maybe one was looking this way while one. Maybe that was why it's so hard to get her married to somebody. They couldn't tell who she was looking at. I don't know.
To me, it sounds like one is more, that Rachel's eyes were more becoming or beautiful than Leah's.
I read that too. I read that earlier by a commentator I didn't even know. I can't remember now who said that. Anyway, go ahead, James.
It says, having gentle or weak eyes, the sculptor captures the link between man and animals through his trademark tender-eyed expressions that emphasize the emotion within. A young, tender-eyed woman blinked at him with pity.
Well,
That says that's the Hebrew.
I looked it up too. I did the same thing you're doing now, and I couldn't get a consensus. I got a lot of ideas, but I couldn't get a consensus. At the end of the day, we still don't know for sure what that means.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Leah's tender-eyed. Bible says so. But
Rachel was beautiful.
Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful. The contrast there leads me to believe one was pretty and one wasn't. That's just kind of what I get out of that. I don't know what tender-eyed means, but apparently it was not an attractive feature to have. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Now remember, Laban had said, what do you give me? Or what do you want for wages? And he said, your daughter. He says, I worked 7 years for her. Boy, she must have been something. She must have been something. I can't remember the last time I applied for a job and where it says salary desired, I put, I'll give you 7 years for your daughter. You know, I wish I could go back and be 18 again. I would do that just once, just to see what people would say. That'd be funny. But moving on. That's what he said. I know she's beautiful, and I know that he wanted to marry her. But somebody should have handed that boy a copy of Donald Trump's book, Art of the Deal, because I think he could have got her for less than 7 years. But, you know, when you say that, when you throw that out there, of course he's going to accept it. So verse 19, Laban said, well, it's better I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Abide with me. So that sealed the deal. He said, I'll give you 7 years, of labor for her, and Laban said, "You've got a deal, buddy." Verse 20, "And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her."
Wow.
We're trying, I mean,
Time flies.
huh?
What's he say?
When you're having fun.
7,
Wrong.
no, time does go by quickly. I mean, I won't lie to you. My wife and I have been together for 17 years, married for 14. And I don't know where all them years went, but still, 7 years is a long time, flying or not. That's a long, long time.
You just getting started.
Well, so was he. That's where we're going. So Jacob served the 7 years, and they seemed like a few days. Verse 21, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her." He's ready to start a family. Now again, remember, he was at least 60, and some people think as old as maybe 75 when this started. So whatever age you want to pick, 7 years on top of that, he's not getting any younger. He wants to start a family. Verse 22, Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. It was customary in those days for a wedding, they'd have a week-long feast. And the first night after they had their initial celebration would be the night of the joining of man and wife, and then you spend the next 6 days just, celebrating this. So he gets a feast together, and all the men of the place made a feast, it says. Verse 23, it came to pass in the evening, he took Leah, his daughter, brought her to him, and he went in under her. A couple things that I can't help but ask. Where is Rachel?
Yeah.
Why is she, not around? I happen to believe she loved Jacob as much as Jacob loved her. I happen to believe she would have protested it if she knew what was going on, so I can only assume she didn't know. Let me say it this way. If there was a set date for these 7 years to be up, she may have been counting the days just as Jacob was. Maybe there wasn't a set date yet. Maybe she just knew it was sometime this year. Maybe Daddy sent her to go tend the flock and she's in a far field and she just missed it.
I'm sure she did what she was told to do.
That's the other thing I was going to point out. It may have been a command by her father. Now remember, we studied We studied Jacob with his mom and brother and how that kind of went down. Remember, he was under orders from his mother to deceive their father. So it's possible that both these scenarios are given to us in the Bible on purpose to mirror one another. First, you've got deception by Jacob at the command of his mother in front of Isaac. Remember, Isaac was going blind, thought he was dying. Jacob goes in, he gets the blessing. And the father's deceived. Well, here we have a similar situation, but really not that similar when you look at the particulars. So it came to pass in the evening, he took Leah. Now here's the other thing. Why didn't Leah say anything?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, she was happy.
She could get
You
a
must be kidding me.
Yeah, she get a husband.
Well, but think about it.
Too.
You know that the next day you're going to have to face your sister. This isn't just going to go
She's
away.
there.
Too late.
I imagine she was there and she had no choice in the matter.
I think they were ordered to do this. I don't think they were given a whole lot of choices. Probably a lot of protestation, probably a lot of tears. But at the end of the day, what can you do? I don't think Leah hated her sister so much that she just wanted to hurt her. I think, like you said, Cindy, and that's kind of what I was fishing for, I think their father ordered them to do this, and so they did it. Anyway.
But I think Leah probably went gladly.
Probably. Well, think about it. She hasn't been married till yet.
She was
so.
the oldest, and she didn't have, she wouldn't.
She's the oldest, and we don't know how old they are, but they're above marrying age.
Oh, yeah.
Both of them. They're well past normal marrying age. Now, I know you're going to ask me how I know that. We'll get there. But anyway, came to pass in the evening, he took Leah, his daughter, brought her to him, and he went in under her. They're probably close to the same height, probably a very similar build. Leah was probably beautiful from the neck down. She just had something going on with her face. Tender-eyed or whatever it was. Y'all can laugh at me if you want to, but I'm telling you, there was something wrong with her. Nobody wanted to marry her. I don't know what it was, but there was something There was something going on with her, I don't know.
God had a plan.
That's what I was fixing to say, you're
Amen.
leaving that out.
Remember?
God planned.
Better right there.
7 years?
Yes. 7 years pictures completion. That's right.
7 years. God's plan.
So anyway, I think that Laban knew enough about Jacob to know that he was not going to go back on their agreement, even if he was tricked into it. Once he had gone in under her, he wasn't going to come away from that and say, all right, forget this deal, this ain't what I signed on for. And again, it reminds me of what happened with Isaac. Isaac didn't come out of that deal, as mad as he may have been, he didn't come out of the deal and say, you know what, it don't count, I was tricked. He blessed Jacob. So it's interesting. For all I know, God worked this out to teach Jacob something. I mean, I don't know, but it's possible because of the way. Look, God was going to give Jacob the blessing anyway. And I know he was obeying his mama, but still, he was a grown man when he did it. Because of the way that he manipulated his father, maybe this was a way for him to learn from that experience, for him to have to deal with it. He ran from the situation. He didn't have to stay and deal with it. And here's a lesson I want you to take away from this. You can run 500 miles away from your problems. You don't get away from God. Think about that. Had he stayed home and dealt with Esau, God would have worked it out, but he would have had to deal with his problems instead of running away from his problems. Now, he needed a wife anyway, but he didn't have to go and stay. So I just think it's interesting that one way or another, you're going to have to deal with the things that you've done. And this may have been, I don't know this, but it may have been a lesson that God was trying to teach Jacob before he could really bless him. So who knows? Anyway, it's just an interesting deal. So Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for a handmaid, and it came to pass in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this thou hast done to me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? Why have you done this? And of course, Laban's got an answer. It must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Now, it's possible that that's true. It's possible that was the custom. But it's also possible Laban knew Jacob didn't know that. And he never made a point to tell it to him. That may have very well been the custom. He may not be lying to him, but he still should have been informed of what was going to happen. Verse 27 says, fulfill her a week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou served with me yet 7 other years. So what that's saying is, you've got a week with your new wife. Spend that time with her, and then we'll have another wedding. You can have Rachel too, but you're going to have to serve another 7 years for her. This time he gets the wife in advance. That's one lesson you learn. Don't wait until the end of the 7 years. No telling who you'll wind up hitched to. So, this time he gets the wife in advance of the 7 years. Verse 28. Jacob did so, fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. Now you're going to find as we go forward in these next few chapters, both of these handmaids wind up in this mix as well. But for the moment, just suffice it to say that Laban let go of a couple of his servant ladies to take care of these new wives. Verse 30, and he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. I feel bad for Leah in this whole scenario. Because who in the world wants to be with somebody who obviously doesn't love you? It's just a sad situation. Somebody said a while ago, maybe this is what God wanted. God had it all worked out. Here's the only problem with that. God could have given him the same number of children by one woman. And we know monogamy is the way that God teaches us to be. Adam only had the one wife, and he was told to replenish the earth with one wife. God didn't give him 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 wives. Now, bigamy was practiced. It was common. I mean, Jacob's own brother Esau had at least 3 wives we know of. So this was done, and it was practiced. It was common, but that doesn't make it right. I have a hard time believing God wanted this to be the way it was, but I also know that God knows what we'll do. I don't think God sat back and said, you know what, I'll give this man 2 wives and 2 handmaids and let him have kids with them. I don't think God ever did that. What God did do is say, well, I know what He's going to do, and I'm going to use it for my honor and glory. So sometimes our plans, and this is the point I'm making, we sin and we know that. We make mistakes, we know that. Sometimes we go left and we should have went right. And we know it was a wrong decision. But God knows what we'll do, and He can plan for our lives anyway. Don't let the devil tell you God's through with you because you made a mistake. God could have said, Jacob, I had all these plans for you, son, but you went and got 4 wives, so I'm not going to help you now. He doesn't do that. He's a loving God. He's a merciful God. He's a gracious God. And He plans things for us that work out to His honor and glory and for our benefit, even when we fail. Now, I'm not saying He glorifies our sin. That's not what I'm saying. But He sees ahead of it. He knows what we're going to do. And He's got all that worked out. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. Let me see if we can get through this. Verse 31 is particularly troubling. It says, when the Lord saw Leah was hated, I don't think hated is a good word for what He felt for her. I think He was indifferent. But in comparison to what He felt for Rachel, it might as well have been hated. And I'm sure it hurt Leah greatly. He opens her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. Reuben means behold a son. And I think she really believed that because she was the first one to offer a son to her husband, they would love her more. Let me tell you this too, and we're going to finish the chapter, but let me tell you this too. These 4 boys come in rapid succession. By the way, is there anybody here without looking who can name all 12 sons and the 1 daughter of Jacob? I made my Sunday school class at my last church learn all 12 boys and the girl. If you want me to, I can do it just to impress you. But take my word for it. I can name all 12 of them. But these first 4 in rapid succession, probably within 4 years. I mean, all within a year of each other. I mean, she was getting pregnant just nearly as quick as she was able. Well, I'll go into how we know that later. I don't want to go into that time. Anyway, the first one means, behold, a son. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard I was hated, He hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Simeon means heard. God heard me. So that's what she named him. My wife considered naming our kids Simeon instead of Gideon, and I talked her out of it. We're going to stick with Gideon. That was one of the names she considered. And again, it means hearing. Verse 34. And she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name is called Levi. And Levi means attachment. I think she really believed after 3 boys in rapid succession, now he'd get attached to her. And I will say this, he obviously is beginning to love her a little bit because he's spending a whole lot of quality time with her. You don't have 4 kids in 4 years by staying away from somebody. Y'all know that, right?
Right.
Take it from somebody who's had lots of kids. He did love her. He just didn't love her like he loved Rachel. Okay? So she thinks now he'll be more in love with her than her sister. But he doesn't. Verse 24, and Laban gave unto his daughter, what did I do? Verse 34, excuse me. She conceived again and bare a son, and said, now this time my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore she called his name Levi, and she conceived again and bare a son, and said, now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and she left bearing. Judah means praise. After 4 sons, she's just praising God that He's been so good to her and blessed her. And so she calls him praise. And of course, we all know that Judah is the line that Christ comes through. Now, I'm going to close because we've spent enough time in this building for tonight. I don't want to wear y'all out. But let me just share with you this. I used to wonder why Judah is the son that Christ comes through. He's not the oldest. He's not the second oldest. He's not the 3rd oldest. And he's not the youngest. Joseph wasn't even the youngest. You would think, and we're going to get there, but you would think after studying Joseph that God would choose Joseph. I don't know that I know, but I have a theory as to why Judah is the one that's chosen. I'll give you my theory. And I know I'm putting the cart way ahead of the horse here. But later on, we're going to find that Reuben does something atrocious. He takes one of his father's wives, and that's not a good idea ever, anytime. So, well, wasn't even his wife, one of his concubines. But anyway, Reuben lays down with one of his daddy's concubines, so that kind of kicks him out of the family will or whatever. I mean, that puts him at odds with his father, obviously. You're going to find when they get to Shechem, some years after this, that both Simeon and Levi do something very, very hateful to a whole city of men. I can understand being mad at the guy who did what he did, but they punished an entire city for the act of one man. And because they were bloodthirsty and brutal, God kind of pushes them out of the way. Judah's the next son, and while he does some things that aren't good also, when Joseph is little, he redeems himself for Benjamin and offers himself in place of Benjamin. We're going to see this when we get there, but I think that's why God chose Judah. Because Judah was well, his name means praise, but he's the one boy that came out of Leah who does not, he doesn't completely throw away his birthright, and he redeems himself for one of his brothers, for the youngest boy. And there's a whole lot in that picture that we'll get to when we get there. But anyway, that's just some food for thought. The main thing I wanted to, and this will get more interesting from here on out. There's a whole lot of stuff you guys are going to see going forward. This is going to get more interesting. You just kind of had to get through this chapter and see why it went the way it went and what's going on. But the main thing I want to take away from this is that Jacob followed the Lord, made a commitment, and he worked hard, and God blessed him. Sometimes it takes longer than we expect. I mean, he puts 14 years of labor in. Sometimes it takes longer than we expect, but God is faithful, and he keeps his promises. And just because he hasn't done what it is we're asking him to do right in that moment doesn't mean he's not going to. So we just got to remember to follow him and to trust him and to let him do what he's promised he'd do for us. Justin's not here to turn this off, so I guess I will, and then we'll have a prayer.